The moment she walked through the glass doors of Lumiere, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, every head in the room turned, not in admiration, but in quiet, cruel judgment. She was wearing a simple emerald green dress, the kind you find folded on a clearance rack, the kind that has no label worth mentioning. Her hair was unstyled but fell naturally around her shoulders in soft waves. No designer bag, no diamonds, no armor. Just a young woman named Serena Voss, standing at the entrance of a world that had never once made room for her, clutching a small piece of paper with a table number written on it in her late mother's handwriting. She almost turned around. Her hand was already reaching for the door behind her when she stopped herself and whispered something under her breath, the same thing her mother used to say to her every morning before school. You belong everywhere you choose to stand. So she straightened her spine, lifted her chin just slightly, and walked forward. What Serena didn't know, what nobody had bothered to tell her, was that the man waiting at that corner table was not just any blind date. He was Callum Ashford, 34 years old, founder and CEO of Ashford Industries, a man whose name appeared in financial magazines and whose face had graced the covers of business publications across 3 continents. He had agreed to this blind date only.
This is Legacy Talks, where every story carries a message about courage, kindness, and the legacy we leave behind. If you enjoy stories that inspire and move you, press like, share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Legacy Talks for more powerful talks and stories.
Because his aunt had begged him for months, insisting she knew someone special. He had expected nothing. He had prepared himself, in fact, for polite small talk and an early exit. He sat at the table in his navy suit, coffee cup in hand, already mentally drafting the excuse he would use to leave by 8 o'clock. And then he saw her. She was moving between the tables slowly, checking the number on her paper against the table placards. Clearly unfamiliar with a restaurant like this, clearly nervous in a way she was trying very hard not to show. He watched her pause near a table where a couple laughed too loudly, watched her step back slightly when a waiter moved past without acknowledging her, watched her look around the room with eyes that were simultaneously vulnerable and impossibly steady. She wasn't performing confidence. She wasn't wearing it like a costume. Whatever she had, it came from somewhere much deeper, and Callum, a man who had spent 15 years reading people in boardrooms, felt something shift quietly inside his chest. When she finally found the table and her eyes met his, she didn't smile the practiced smile he was used to, the kind designed to impress. She smiled the way people smile when they're genuinely relieved, a small, honest curve of the lips. And she sat down across from him and said simply that she hoped she hadn't kept him waiting. He told her she hadn't, and that was the beginning. Serena had grown up in a small apartment on the east side of the city with her mother, a seamstress who worked 12-hour days and still came home humming. They had very little, but her mother had filled every corner of their life with warmth and intention. Serena had earned a scholarship to study literature, had worked 2 jobs through university, and after her mother passed away 2 years ago from a sudden illness, she had quietly folded her grief into herself and kept moving because that was the only thing she knew how to do. She now worked as a junior editor at a small publishing house, earning just enough to keep the apartment her mother had loved. She had no social media presence worth mentioning, no wealthy connections, no safety net. What she had was a fierce, quiet intelligence, a heart that had been broken and rebuilt more than once, and a way of listening to people that made them feel, for the first time in a long while, genuinely heard. Callum discovered this within the first 20 minutes of their conversation. He had expected to do most of the talking, as he always did. People were usually eager to impress him, to list their accomplishments, to perform. Instead, Serena asked him a question no one had asked him in years. She asked him what he had wanted to be when he was a child, before the business, before the success. He had laughed, caught off guard, and then found himself actually answering, actually remembering the 8-year-old boy who had wanted to build things with his hands, who had loved fixing broken radios and taking apart clocks just to understand how they worked. He talked for several minutes about that boy, and when he stopped and looked at Serena, she was watching him with an expression that was not impressed or calculating. She simply looked moved, as though she understood something about that boy, as though she was glad he existed. Over the next hour, the restaurant around them seemed to dissolve. The polished surfaces and soft lighting and quiet murmur of wealthy conversation faded into background noise. Serena told him about her mother, not with self-pity, but with a love so enormous it filled the space between them. She told him about a manuscript she had been secretly working on for 3 years. A novel about a woman who spends her life translating other people's words, and one day discovers she has forgotten the sound of her own voice. She told him this with a self-deprecating laugh, as though embarrassed to admit it mattered to her. And Callum felt something he had not felt in a very long time, the specific ache of recognizing yourself in someone else's story. He thought about his own silence, the years he had spent building an empire and forgetting to live inside it, the relationships that had dissolved because he was always, in some essential way, elsewhere. He had money and influence and a penthouse overlooking the harbor, and he had been, if he was honest with himself, profoundly lonely in a way that success could not touch. And here was this woman in her simple green dress, with her honest eyes, and her unfinished novel, and her dead mother's courage living in her chest, and she was more present in this single evening than anyone he had shared years with. They closed the restaurant. They didn't realize it until a waiter gently mentioned that the kitchen had been closed for some time. Serena looked horrified and apologized immediately, and Callum laughed a real laugh, not the kind he used in meetings, and said it was the best evening he had spent in as long as he could remember. Outside the restaurant, on the pavement under a sky full of clouds, they stood for a moment in the particular quiet of a city late at night. Serena pulled her thin cardigan tighter against the cool air, and Callum noticed and said nothing but filed it away in the part of his mind that was already, helplessly, paying attention to every detail of her. She told him she had taken the bus to get here. She said it without apology, without shame, just as a fact. He told her he would call a car for her. She refused. He insisted gently. She laughed and said she had been taking buses her whole life, and they had never let her down. Then she looked at him with those steady eyes and told him she had a wonderful evening and meant it entirely, and turned and walked toward the bus stop at the end of the street. Callum Ashford, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, stood on the pavement and watched her go and felt, with absolute certainty, that he had just met the person he had been unconsciously looking for through every crowded room and every hollow achievement of his adult life. He called his aunt that night. He told her she had been right. She laughed so loudly he had to hold the phone away from his ear. In the weeks that followed, he pursued Serena not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with attention the kind she had rarely received. He remembered everything she said. He read the 3 chapters of her novel she finally, nervously, shared with him, and told her not what she wanted to hear, but what was true. That it was extraordinary, that it deserved to exist in the world, that she deserved to finish it. He showed up at her small apartment one Saturday morning with coffee and a bag of pastries, and asked if he could sit beside her while she wrote, just to be near, not needing anything from her. She let him in. And something in the architecture of her carefully constructed solitude quietly opened a door. She had arrived at that blind date with nothing the world of that restaurant recognized as valuable. No status, no wealth, no performance of desirability. But she had brought everything that actually mattered: her full self, her honest grief, her quiet courage, her mother's voice living on in her bones. And the man who had everything the world offered had looked across a table at her, and finally, for the first time, felt like he had enough. Some people search their whole lives for the thing that makes silence feel like home. Serena Voss walked into a restaurant in a green dress from a clearance rack, and without trying, without pretending, she became that thing for a man who had forgotten what he was even searching for. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that your worth was never something you had to prove, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this only reach the people who need them most when you help carry them forward. Before we close, drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been underestimated by a room, only to realize later that the right person was already seeing you clearly? We read every single one.